Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Stephanie L. Willis, and I'll be your host for the next few hours. We just have a recess in the William Woodard trial. What we do know now is the fact that William Woodard will not be taking the stand. He will not be testifying today. We also did hear from the judge that we believe that the prosecution does not have any further rebuttal witnesses. So it looks like we'll be moving forward along in the case pretty soon. So we are in a recess in the William Woodard trial. We do know that we will also be covering the Joseph Jakubowski trial. Joseph, as we know, is charged as a result of sending a 161-page manifesto to Donald Trump while he is sitting in office. And as a result of that, he sent after sending the 161-page manifesto, he went out on a fire to steal some guns from a federally licensed firearms dealer, and then went on a 10-day manhunt. So this trial should be pretty interesting, although we know that he has admitted to stealing the firearms, and he will be serving a 14-year sentence in federal prison. It is known that he will be proceeding forward to trial. Today we have with us Chacon, who is a retired FBI officer out of Los Angeles. Bob, how are you today? And thanks so much for being with us today. We know that you are very familiar as a retired FBI agent, that you should be very familiar with these types of cases. What I do want to talk to you about is the fact that Mr. Jakubowski in the past had not had any kind of past criminal charges that were similar to this case. Do you find that happens quite often, where a suspect or a defendant in this case will go from not really having similar charges to having something so egregious as this?
Well, I mean, I think this looked like a natural progression to me. I mean, we do know that, like I believe in 2001, he had an arrest for resisting arrest with an officer with violence. I think in 2008, he had a domestic violence charge on him. So, when we see these, these events, oftentimes when you're able to look back in hindsight, you kind of see a progression of criminal activity. Nobody jumps to a mass shooting, out of the box. I mean, we did have that phenomena in Las Vegas where Stephen Paddock didn't have any criminal history really to speak of. And then he, killed 58 people. So sometimes you do have that and it sneaks up on you. But in this case, he was known to local law enforcement. He had been known to be violent on occasion. He had a domestic violence dispute. He was a convicted felon. In fact, that's why he couldn't go out and purchase those firearms legally. Mm-hmm. And when he did break into that gun store and steal those firearms, he left an apology letter with his sister, written to the gun store owner, saying he was sorry for having to steal the guns, but because he was a convicted felon, he wasn't allowed to purchase them. And then he thanked the gun store owner for protecting his Second Amendment rights. Oh. So you did have some progression of criminal behavior in this case.
Well, I would tend to agree with you that there is some progression, but the fact that a lot of the times before it was simply for, I believe it was a suspended driver's license that he had. So progression, but to go from, I guess, a domestic violence to, I guess threats against the presidency, that seems like something that is very attenuated in my opinion. What I do want to talk to you about as well is the fact that he went on there was a 10-day manhunt looking for him. What are the steps that the FBI or even the state officials would proceed forward with in this case in order to find him, in order to look for him during that manhunt?
Right. Well, I mean, typically the easiest things are the first things you look at, his vehicle, right? But right after he broke into that gun store, he set his vehicle on fire a couple of miles away. So the police responded to that. At the same time, they were at the gun store. So he ditched his vehicle and set it on fire. And that was really the first indication they knew who the suspect was, because now the vehicle was registered to him. So they knew whose vehicle was on fire, and who, now they went to the video of the gun store. So then you look at things like cell phones. Well, he really wasn't using his cell phone. He was kind of living off the land. He was camping. So he didn't rent hotel rooms or stuff. So that's normally what you would look at, is cell phones, debit cards, vehicle movement. And those things were absent in this case. And so he was successful in staying, off the grid in a sense for 10 days. Now, the only reason that it ended after 10 days was he was camping on the back end of a gentleman's farm, and the gentleman was out plowing one day and saw him camping. And then he engaged him in conversation, and the farmer said there was nothing threatening about him during this 1 hour conversation that they had. And then when he got back, the farmer saw on the news that they were looking for this guy, and he called the authorities. Otherwise, who knows, he could still be on the run to this day.
Well, you brought up a great point, the fact that this farmer was able to see this information that he was missing on the news. Talk to us a little bit about how important it is to release certain types of information to the media so the public is aware of these circumstances.
Oh, it's vitally important. It's probably the most important step, because what you do is you engage the entire population of the local area in your efforts to find this person. So, if someone sees them in a convenience store or something like that, because people have to eat. And so, you get that picture and get that video and get a description if you can. If all you have is a sketch from a sketch artist, you push that out to the public as much as you can. And the media is a vital partner in every one of those steps. That's why most police departments now have a Twitter account, a Facebook page, and things like that to leverage the social media assistance of, especially in fugitive hunts where, time is of the essence and we need to get this person off the street. If you can enlist, all the other people in the general population as a force multiplier, I mean, you hit on probably the most vital step in something like this.
Well, in regards to this 161-page manifesto that he wrote, we do know that there are a lot of instances in which many people may not like the current individual who is sitting in office. So what does the FBI look for in order to determine whether, like a letter that's written, or in this case, a 161-page manifesto, is an actual threat to the presidency?
Yeah, when you have a document like this that's so long, and I read through it, and there's a lot of repetition in there. He repeats certain phrases over and over and over again, and it's particularly detailed. He goes on to state that he thought 9/11 was a controlled demolition by the government to bring down the Twin Towers in New York, things like that. So there's a lot of antisocial, paranoia type proclamations in this manifesto. He talks about currency being a lie and a way to keep the government to keep people under control. He talks about a lot of historical wrongs that he thinks the government did to its people. So it's a lot of antisocial things. But when you pick out there, there's a lot of rage. He actually uses the word rage several times. So in this day and age, law enforcement can't really take the chance of saying, this person's just babbling and he's not really serious and he doesn't have the means to carry out any threats. We have to kind of, we're not trained mental health professionals. And there are several big cities like Los Angeles here that have mental health teams that respond to police officers now, in certain events. But this is someone who clearly, and I think even one of his family members said he wasn't taking his medication recently, so he should be on medication. And a psychologist would be better off able to tell you specifically what was wrong with him. He may have been a paranoid schizophrenic, he may be bipolar, but in this 161-page manifesto, there's enough there to think that this person could be a danger, particularly when he breaks into a gun store. And one of the guns he stole was a fully automatic M16, which is a military type weapon. And so, he had 18 firearms that he had with him. So why anyone would need that much, if you're, he also proclaims in the manifesto that, or actually afterwards with the news media, he called in and he claimed from jail that he was just on his way to North Dakota to get off the grid. He didn't want anything to do with the government anymore. Well, if that's the case, you really don't need 18 weapons to protect yourself out in North Dakota. And so, combined with the manifesto and all the rage that's in there, and the gun store, burglary, the law enforcement had no choice but to hunt this guy down and get him off the street.
And so in regards to the psychology of this whole instance, how does the FBI or any type of agency work in tandem with a psychologist in order to determine maybe what the future steps of this individual would be in the attempt to catch him?
There's two or three ways, actually. So we have the profiling unit at the behavioral analysis unit back at Quantico, which, Criminal Minds, the TV show, is based on. So we have profilers, many of whom have PhDs in forensic psychology and are psychologists themselves. We also have outside contract psychologists, forensic psychologists, that we deal with on a regular basis and are experts in criminal behavior of this type. So we'll consult them. So there's a couple of different ways. We'll take that manifesto and they'll pore over it, and they'll look for any kind of hints or clues in there. At the same time, your street level agents and detectives are out there interviewing the families, looking at his social media. Is there places he likes to go? Is there places he vacations? Is there a place that he had a dream of visiting? And so those are the places they might go to. So there may be a place that he always liked to go as a child, where he vacationed with his family, or a place he always dreamed of going, or things like that. That kind of information you can find out through family, friends, and social media. So you combine, the psychologists will be, and the profilers will be looking at this manifesto, and the investigators will be feeding them additional information they gain from the friends and the family. The cyber detectives and agents will be looking at his social media footprint and feeding that information back to the profilers. And you'll start to get a couple of different possible avenues, and then you follow those avenues. The agents in the street and the detectives on this task force that's out there hunting him will get that information back. So the information gets fed to the profilers, and the profilers feed back to the street the possible avenues of escape where this guy might be headed, and then you saturate those areas. That's really the way a manhunt in the initial days works.
In this case, we know that Joseph Jakubowski has made or has conducted some interviews with the media. In addition to, we know that he is an avid writer. So the interviews that he has with the media, how does that affect the ultimate investigation in the long run? Or does it help, or does it not?
It all helps, I believe. Every time, even when you have a suspect in an interrogation or interview room, the more you can get them to talk, the more it's going to help you get information, even if they're trying to lie to you, even if they're trying to lead you down, a wrong path. All of that is still helpful because we can figure all that out. So the longer somebody talks and the more information they can give us, either written information or financial information or verbal information just from them talking, I always think that's good for me. And, some of my friends who are defense attorneys obviously have the opposite thing. They always want their clients not to talk.
Right.
The least amount of talking a defendant can do, according to most of my defense attorney friends, the better the defendant is going to be in the long run. So I think anything he says, is poured over by the investigators. They hear it, they look at it from different angles, try to see any benefit that can be gained. I don't think there's a downside, to law enforcement if this guy keeps talking to the media.
What about any kind of information maybe the law enforcement would not have wanted the public to know? Does that happen in some instances? Because we do know that sometimes law enforcement would like to keep certain types of information to themselves.
I mean, it could happen. It's a risk, but it's one of those things you try to control as best you can. Certain places, the jails allow them to talk. Law enforcement can make a motion to actually have a gag order, and so the defendant won't be able to talk to the media. It's unusual. Most of the time, the information that we don't want getting out there is not necessarily in the hands of the defendant. It's information that that we have that's going to help apprehend him or her. And so it's not as a big a concern unless the person's an ideological, say a terrorist or something like that, where you now give them a platform to spew forth
Right.
their hatred and their ideology over the media, which is now going to give other people a chance to be either radicalized or indoctrinated into their beliefs. So, it is a fine line. And so you do have to kind of monitor it. And if it does get to the point, like you're saying, where information might get out there, but, there's nothing to prevent, absent a gag order, there's nothing to prevent a defendant, even the incarcerated defendant, to talk to his defense attorney and have the defense attorney then go out and talk to the media, unless there's a gag order. So, there's usually more of an upside to having them talk than a downside.
Well, I would agree with you. As a former prosecutor, I do know that having the defendant speak is helpful to our cases. But in regards to looking at it in another circumstance, you did bring up a bit of terrorism, which we know is not really the case here. But we do know that he has said on a numerous of occasions that he wants to get his story told, that he wants to, I believe that he said that the only reason why he wants to do a trial is just to tell the public the truth. Isn't that a little kind of shaky? I know that sometimes when we're looking at instances from individuals who would be terrorists, that maybe the information that that they would like to be disseminated is not something that we would want the public to receive. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, yes. But, there are just certain inherent things in our system that allow a defendant to have his day in court and to, there are safeguards. A jury trial is just not a platform to make a speech and things like that. So while his attorney might be able to do things in opening and closing arguments to put forth his ideology, there's going to be a limited opportunity for him, even at trial, to spew forth all that stuff. But on the other hand, we still live in a free society where freedom of speech is not taken away very lightly. And so to write from prison, to write to media outlets is appropriate or allowed. There is a fine line when you start taking away that right of a defendant to speak to the media and stuff. So I think that in certain cases we do see gag orders issued, and prosecutors rightfully monitor it with the investigators and say, okay, we want to we want to go for a gag order, and we want at this point in time. But I think that the default position is that he's going to be allowed to put forth whatever ideology he has. Now I mean, on the terrorism side of the house, we used to see ISIS publish a newsletter that taught people how to build bombs and how to attack people, and so those things are just out there. That's just it's one of those unfortunate consequences of the internet in our technological society. So I'm not sure how much more a defendant like this or another defendant might be able to put forth that's going to help people do more damage.
Right.
If you look at his manifesto in this case, it's a rambling antisocial statement that I'm not sure anybody reading this 161-page diatribe is going to be turned into any more of a criminal than they might already be, or be turned to his ideology. It's just not that well put together.
And I know that we only have you for a couple more minutes, but in regards to the FBI in this case, because we know that there were federal charges that he pled guilty to, and that he's currently or will be sentenced to 14 years. He will be serving 14 years. Will the federal agency and the state continue to work together during this state trial?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Because he actually faced 20 years on the federal level, and he got 14. So, I think the interest is in keeping this guy off the street for as long as possible. So, it all depends on what he's facing in the state, and, if his sentences in state and federal run concurrently as opposed to consecutively. So that's all going to play in. And I'm sure the federal prosecutor has lent every bit of assistance that he can to the state prosecutor in this case. And, it's all in the same interest of, keeping this individual off the streets for as long as possible. I mean, at his federal sentencing, he got into he cursed at the judge and a profanity-laced exchange with the judge, where he told the judge, don't give me 14 years, don't give me 20 years, set me free or kill me. And that was his attitude. So, he's not very cooperative even with the system. He's not cooperating with his defense counsel on a state level, from what I understand. So he's a very difficult individual for the system to deal with. But they'll deal with him, and I'm sure the prosecutors are cooperating as best they can.
Well, I thank you so much for being with us today, Mr. Chacon. I know that throughout this trial, we're probably going to get some more of your insight and some more of your expertise, because I'm pretty sure this will be a trial that a lot of people will not forget. So we thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. Thanks you so much.